Welcome back, and I'm really happy to have you now in the third session of this course, Classic 395, Greek Myth, Gods, Heroes, and Humans. So this would be the third week of the course if you're taking the school year schedule, or the third day of the course if you're taking the summer schedule. So I'm really glad that we've gotten you here past the first two sessions of the course, here to the third session. And we're now going to switch to the two chapters, chapters 3 and 4, that have to do with your first Greek author, Hesiod. So the first two chapters, as you saw in the previous videos, were introduction to ancient Greek mythology in an overview, and then the scholarly interpretations that have formed over the years of why the Greeks used mythology and designed it the way they did. But now we're going to start actually reading some. So chapters 3 and 4 cover the first author, Hesiod, and we will be looking first at his bio, and then at his two major texts, Theogony in chapter 3 and the Works and Days in chapter 4, to get you underway with reading the actual ancient Greek texts. As always, this is the first set of chapters having to do with the ancient works. Make sure that you are familiar from your syllabus and your calendar about what assignments are due. So each of these chapters requires a single discussion question to be answered from the end of the chapter, and then that answer posted in direct print on the forum, the one for chapter 3 and the one for chapter 4. And please also remember, once you have finished entering your own answer into each of the forums, that you also go to the other students' answers and select at least one, hopefully more than one, to give a response to what the student wrote. And remember that it's the student responses that you make to the other students that count for the attendance portion of the grade that you need to carry out. Your own form entries need to be on time, the due date of the class, and then the student responses you could do sometime after that, but make sure that you complete at least one student response for each of the sessions of the course, as listed on the forum, the syllabus, and the calendar. Okay, at this point I'd like you to pause your video, please, and get out from resources the map, the one that says map of the Greek world. Please pause your video and open up the map. Okay, do you have that? It's the one that's titled Map of Ancient Greece. Okay, if you didn't find it yet, it's under Resources. Okay, you have it now? Excellent. All right, so now there's a few things on the map that I'm going to point to in order to discuss Hesiod's bio. You should, from the map video from before, be reasonably familiar with the parts of the Greek world that are pertinent for this course, and of course we'll be discussing them in more detail as we need to, video by video. But for right now, I'd like you to get out the map and be ready to follow along where I point to in order to discuss Hesiod's bio. You'll notice for this session that we have several videos in a row. We have one for the bio. We're then going to have another one for Theogony, and finally we're going to have one for Works and Days, and that will complete chapters 3 and 4 before we move to the next series, still in the same session, regarding chapter 5. That's coming up afterwards. Okay, so now the first place on the map that I'd like you to look is up in the northeast corner. So you have the Aegean Sea there in the center and right center of the map. And then you have Asia Minor, which is now the west coast of Turkey, given to you over on the right side of the map, so like over here. And I'd like you to look up in the northeast corner of the map on the land, and you should see the word Aeolia, A-E-O-L-I-A, in grayish letters on the background of the yellow. Okay, so have you got Aeolia? So that's one location that's relevant for Hesiod. And then I'd like you to come over to the west, over to mainland Greece. First of all, it may always help when you do look at mainland Greece to locate Athens. Athens is almost in the dead center of the map, just a little bit to the left of dead center. And when you get Athens, go a little bit northwest of it, so that's this way, and you should find Thebes. And that region where Thebes is called Boeotia. Okay, now, We are very fortunate with Hesiod's bio because we have more autobiographical information than from him than we normally have for our authors, and we usually don't have a lot of information on the personal backgrounds of the authors. We usually have to scrap together whatever information we can get in order to form any kind of a bio. But we happen to be better informed about Hesiod than normal. So, and that comes from these works, Theogony and Works and Days. So according to Hesiod's autobiographical information, his father originally grew up in that region, Aeolia, that we mentioned at the beginning, over in the northeast part of the map, and traveled from there. He emigrated from Aeolia across probably the northern section of Greece, the north coast of the Aegean Sea, and came down through Thessaly and down into Boeotia, and he settled near Thebes at a city that's not actually on your map, but it's called Askra. It's in that same region, Boeotia, where you found Thebes just a moment ago. Now, Askra is located in a relatively mountainous area, as in fact most of that part of Greece actually is, but in a mountainous area of the northern section of mainland Greece, and it's there in Askra where Hesiod was born. So we're told that Hesiod grew up as a husbandryman, a shepherd and sheep farmer, and that he was grazing his flocks on the side of Mount Helicon, which is one of the main mountains there in Boeotia. Now, while he was on Mount Helicon, according to his autobiographical information in Theogony, he received inspiration from the Muses. You were introduced to the Muses in the prior chapters, and they are also introduced to you in this chapter. The Muses, remember, are the 9 daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne, who was the goddess of memory. And Hesiod himself gives homage to the Muses even before providing any additional information of his own for the opening of Theogony. And in fact, the section in which he gives his autobiography is the section in which he's giving the homage to the Muses. He gives them proper obeisance before starting in with his actual story. Okay, so the Muses approach him, and they basically criticize him harshly as a hillbilly and a ruckseed for wasting all of his time tending sheep on the mountain. Why isn't he putting his God-given intellectual talent to use and writing poetry the way he should be? And one of the points about that is that the herding of sheep is a relatively backwater, uncivilized activity. And much later, when you read Homer's Odyssey, you will encounter the wicked Cyclops Polyphemus. And the way he's being depicted also as this uncouth monster is that he is herding sheep. And that depiction of him herding sheep makes him look sort of backwater-ish, essentially, in comparison to the much more dignified Greeks with wine and viticulture and more advanced forms of civilization with the way that they can sail on boats and so forth. So in the like manner, Hesiod is stuck with an uncivilized activity for his way of life, and the Muses come along to get him out of that. All right, so when they show up, they inspire him to begin the composition of poetry, and it's from there that we have the 2 works that come to us, Theogony and Works and Days. There were other works attributed to Hesiod in antiquity, including one that is a catalog of women that is borderline misogynist, because most of the women who are described in that work are not exactly role models for what the Greeks thought to be good women. So Hesiod does not have a very high thought for the female gender. We talked about feminism in chapter 2, and you could see an example of one of the earliest authors who definitely does not demonstrate any feminist thought. Okay, so once Hesiod has been inspired, he then composes these 2 works, the Theogony and the Works and Days. Now, we have one other piece of biographical information about him, and that, once again, you need to look at your map. If you go from a little bit east of Thebes, you'll come to the shoreline of Boeotia, and you'll see a very long, skinny island. It goes sort of like that. And the long, skinny island is called Euboea. And there is one town on the shoreline called Oropus, and one town called Eretria, along Greece, mainland Greece, and along the shoreline of Euboea. And apparently Hesiod, who was not very inclined to lengthy sea travel, because sea travel was quite a dangerous way of getting around in the ancient Greek world. Storms could come up and boats could be sunk and such. Nonetheless, dared to make this really long journey by water from mainland Greece all the way across Eretria, to Euboea, to Eretria, and then back again. That was his really, really long sea journey. Why did he make such a tremendous long sea journey? Because he was entered in a contest in which he competed with the poet Homer for poetic composition and singing. He won. He was really proud of that because he received this enormous tripod, which he then brought back to his hometown of Astra and dedicated to the Muses. And so we have that story, which is also described to us in a much later work by the biographer Plutarch, about how Hesiod and Homer competed, and Hesiod defeated Homer and was able to get his big prize. Now, besides just the personal victory of Hesiod over Homer, what that also represents in Hesiod's mode of writing is a larger scale triumph. Now, this was not necessarily something the ancient Greeks would have thought of much, but it's a tendency with Hesiod's works and Homer's works that you're going to read later, Iliad and Odyssey, that modern scholars have picked up on. And that is the difference between what's called the island tradition, which is the Aegean Sea and eastern Greece, and the continental tradition, which is Hesiod's own location in mainland central Greece. The idea is that Hesiod is trying to, in writing his poetry, is trying to separate his literary tradition from the one established by Homer and earlier writers, maybe the influences of the Near East. There are several points about that. First of all, Homer is a poet of the Eastern Greek world. We can tell that from one of the Homeric hymns you're going to read later that has this elusive reference to a blind man of Chios. We don't actually know whether that is in fact Homer. There's reasons to think it might perhaps not be. However, the hymns are written very much in Homer's style, and that suggests that Homer was a poet of that part of the world, even if that particular reference doesn't necessarily refer to him. So he's from Eastern Greece, whereas Hesiod is distinguishing his poetry as from Western Greece. Homer, in writing his works over from the islands in Eastern Greece, would have been influenced by a lot of Near Eastern writings, of course not Greek. And Hesiod is saying that he himself is setting the record straight in writing without having to resort to the influences of Near Eastern writings. And then again, Homer is composing his poetry orally. Homer did not actually write his poetry down in his day. It was compiled later, whereas Hesiod definitely is taking out what served for pen and paper back then, maybe papyrus, and writing out his work. And then there's one final point. Even though the Muses were born in Pieria, which is south of Mount Olympus, and if you look on your map, you go way up to the northwest corner of the map, and you can find Mount Olympus up there. Pieria is the plain that's just at the base of the mountain. That would be the normal association geographically with the Muses with Greece, and that is in this plain of Pieria. But when Hesiod describes the Muses coming to visit him, he refers to them as the Heliconian Muses, referring to them as local to Mount Helicon, which means once again that Hesiod is taking his inspiration from the Muses as localized there basically in his own backyard. So the Muses come to him on Mount Helicon, inspire him to put aside his backwater life of raising sheep, and inspire him into a much more advanced, civilized way of living, the composition of poetry. So therefore, in all these ways, Hesiod insists that even though it's elusive, that his own literary tradition is not in any way to be confused with that which is going on with Homer. It's separate, and it is written down, it is continental, and it is internalized within Greece itself, and not influenced in any way from outside. Okay, so that's the first of the series of videos on Hesiod. That covers his bio. The next video coming right up is going to cover the first of the two works in chapter 3, and that is the Theogony. Okay, come on right back.